Hello everyone, you're welcome to my YouTube channel once again. Please I'd love you to subscribe if you like the content of this video because I've taken time to really put good work into it. I'll be talking about altered chords, chord extensions, then added tone chords in this particular video. Without wasting our time, please, I'd like you to check out the video now. We're going to be starting with chord qualities, the minor, the major, and the dominant chord qualities. Alright, let's go into the video. God bless you. So subscribe, click on the notification bell icon to be notified whenever I post a new video. Alright, let's go into the video. Thanks for watching. By saying that there are three fundamental chord qualities in music. We have the major chords, we have the minor chord, and we have the dominant chords. Those are the three chord qualities we have. Now we know generally that our major chords are chords which have a major third and a major seventh. So you fall into the major chord family, and they are usually happy sounding. They give a generally happy sound. For example, I'll use C major seventh to demonstrate this. Now if you listen to the sound of that, it has this bright sound to it. The color is bright. Now it has a major third and a major seventh. That's why it is called C7. So C major 7 rather. So how did we get the major third and the major seventh? Now C is our root. Our third is the third note in the major scale. So we have, so this is a major third. If it is flattened, it becomes a minor third. Following the same rule, this is our seventh note. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. This is our major seventh. If you flatten it, it becomes a minor seventh, and that's how it goes. So our root, major third, perfect fifth, and the major seventh, giving you the C major seventh chord. So that's basically how you get your major seventh chord, and it's usually happy sounding. All your major chords, the major seventh chords, are actually like that. Even when we start looking at the extensions that can be added to them, they still sound happy. Then we move on to the minor chords. Minor chords compared to the major chords are usually generally sad sounding. They are emotional. Now the difference between your major chords and your minor chords is just basically the switching from the third, the major third, to the minor third. So instead of having this, you flatten the third. So this is your C minor seventh. You flatten the seventh, you also flatten the third. So it gives you a more emotional sound. So you can just, from your major seventh, flatten the third and the fifth and the seventh, and you get your minor seventh immediately. Alright, so that's for the major, the minor chord family. Then we have the third quality, which is the dominant chord. Now, but before I look at dominant chord, just look at this. Now if you notice, because I did not flatten my seventh, I can't call that my C minor seventh chord. We'll look at what that chord actually is as we move on. It is the reverse of the dominant chord, but we'll get to know what that is. Now if we then look at the dominant chord, the dominant chord would have your major third but a minor seventh, your major third but a minor seventh. So you have this. Now, the sound of your dominant chord is just in between, a little bit happy, a little bit sad. You mostly see this the dominant seventh chords in blues and jazz music a lot of the time. So those are the three major chord qualities we use in music. We have the major, the minor, and the dominant. So I'll just quickly touch that. Major, you touch the minor, you touch the dominant. Those qualities, we are then going to forge ahead into what we know as extended chords. Now, extended chords are basically your chords that have notes added to them beyond an octave. Now, what is an octave? An octave is something like this. C. Now, anything beyond this C here is an octave. So when you count your major scale, when you get to that same note above the first, you have an octave actually at that point. Then everything above the octave is actually called an extension of any chord that is formed within that octave. Now, the chords that can be formed within the octave are usually mainly triad, suspended chords, and your seventh chords, because even seventh chords fall within the octave. If you play any seventh chord, even the last note is usually a seventh, whether minor or major. It doesn't get to the first note, your tonic, on the next octave. So when you add notes on the next octave to a major seventh chord, or you add notes above the octave of the major scale, which from where you get your chords, we say you've gotten chord extensions. Now, our chord extensions are majorly stacks of thirds. What I mean by that is that you add them in thirds. So if this is a third, another third is this, your seventh, your ninth is another third, then the last is this. So stacking in thirds, you have C, e.g. or C major 7th, C9, C11, C13th. So stacking them in thirds. How do we get the fact that I'm calling 9, 7 and the rest? Alright, so we count on the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you see that your major second on the next octave is what I call the 9. 10, 11, which is your perfect fourth on the previous octave. I'm calling it the 11th now. 12, 13th, and the 13th is your major 6, or your minor 6 rather. Your major 6 on the previous octave. So your 2 becomes 9, your 4 becomes 11, and your 6 becomes 13. So that is how it is usually added. So this ends up being C major 7. If you add a 9 to it, it becomes C major 9. If you add an 11 to it, it becomes C major 11. Or sorry, C major 9, major 11, 13th. Can you see this? Now, there are rules for naming seventh chords. We're going to get to that later. So we're going to move on. So when you have a triad, a seventh added to it, then from that point, adding notes an octave above is actually going to yield you what we call the extended chords. So extended chords are actually from the 9th upwards to the 13th. So let's look at what the major 9 would look like. The major 9 has this formula. It has your 1, your 3rd, your 5th, your 7th, and your 9th. So this is your C major 9 chord. Now let's look at what the minor 9 chord would sound like. 1, flattened 3rd, 5th, flattened 7th, and your 9th. Your 7th and your 9th gives you your C minor 9 chord. Then we go on to the dominant 9th chord. We have your 1, your 3, your 5, your flat 7, and your 9. This is your C9 chord. I hope we're getting the gist. Alright, so we move on to the 11th chords. Now, 11th chords actually add a perfect fourth above, so you call it perfect 11. It's the same thing. Well, just take note that it's an octave higher than where you have your real tonic. Alright, so we'll look at the major 11. Your major 11 is 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Now, this particular chord is called the C major 11 because after your 9 you added the perfect fourth above. So this is called C major 11. So let's look at C minor 11. The C minor 11 chord will just have your 9 and 11 added to your C major 7 chord. So this is C minor 11. C minor 11 chord. Then we'll move on to the C dominant 11 chord, which is 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, and 11. So 1, 3, 5, flat 7, that's your dominant chord, 9 and 11. So this is your C 11 chord. Beautiful sound. Now we move on to C11, that's C dominant 11, right? Then we move on to our 13th chords, and we have our major 13, minor 13, dominant 13. So we're going to do this. Now our major 13 is actually 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. Although it's rarely used in music, but it has to be taught. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. So this is called the C major 11 major 13th chord. Then we move on to the C minor 13th chord. We're still looking at the extensions. We have this. So this is the C minor 11th. 1, flattened 3rd, 5th, flattened 7th, 9, 11, and 13. Nice chord. Has a lot of suspense to it. Then we have the dominant 13 chord. I think a lot of us make use of this chord. 1, 3, 5, flattened 7th, our 9th, our 11th, and our 13th. Has a lot of suspense to it. All you need to know is where do I resolve this chord to. So we're going straight now into the rules we need to obey when leaving out chords, notes in an extended chord. Now we need to know that because you are adding more notes to the chord to make it extended, you need to know that some notes will begin to clash based on their intervals, because there are certain intervals in music that are dissonant. What I mean by dissonant is that they don't actually produce a good harmony together. Instead, they produce a clashing sound. So when your extended chords end up having such notes within that chord, you would not get a very clear sound or a very pleasant sound. So even while you're stacking up thirds, you need to take note of notes that will clash with each other and actually go ahead to take out some of those notes. So the very first basic rule to doing this is recognizing the most important notes in a chord. And the most important notes in a chord are the third and the seventh, because they tell the quality of the chord. If you take note, the quality of a chord is either minor, major, or dominant. And majorly what determines that from all that we've been doing is your third. Is it major or is it minor? Your seventh, is it major or is it minor? So whatever that are not as important as others in a chord. So the most important notes are your third and your seventh, like I rightly explained. Your flattened third, your major third, your flattened seventh, your major seventh are the major determinants of the quality of your chord. Alright, so we're going to look at how notes can be taken out without destroying basically the quality of the chord. Now, so the first and easiest note to take out of a chord is the fifth. For example, let's look at this. This is your C major 7 chord. If you take out the fifth, it doesn't affect the quality of the chord. You can see it. I just omitted the fifth. Let's say C minor 7th. Take out the fifth. It's actually part of the chord, but if you take out the fifth, it doesn't affect the quality of the sound that much. It can change the name of the chord, but it doesn't affect the quality of that particular chord. So, alright, so the fifth is the first note that can be left out most of the time, except when that fifth is a characteristic note, or it's a note that must be part of that chord to give it the quality you're looking for. Now, you can remove the third in a chord if it is clashing with another chord, for example, another note. For example, look at this. Your third is here, and this is your 11th. Your 11th is still the same as your fourth. Can you see? They are just separated in two different octaves. So if you take out your third, it doesn't affect the quality of the notes that much, but this becomes a suspended chord. Why? Because there is no third. So when you take out the third, you have a kind of suspended chord. For example, let's look at this. Then place it here. It's now a suspended chord. They were clashing, so this is your C major 11. The sound is unpleasant. If you take out the third, it becomes a sus chord. We're going to be talking about that. Now, if you try to leave out a seventh, whether flattened or a major seventh, minor or major, you have something different. It's no longer an extended chord. It is called an added tone chord, because without the seventh you can't call it an extended chord. So if you have something like this, this becomes C major at 6, but if it's here, it will be C major at 13th, although it can still be named as A minor 7th. So C major, so C at 9. If I had put it here, it's still C at 9 because we are adding the added ninth note. But imagine adding the ninth over the seventh here. It is C major 9. So there are two different things altogether. If you have your seventh added and your ninth with it, it becomes a C major 9. Take out the 7th, it becomes C add 9. So there are two different things altogether. Where this is an extended chord, this is an added tone chord. We call that an added tone to a triad because there is no 7th there. Now when you have a 9th chord, you can easily omit your 5th, like we said. So this is a 9th chord. Take out the 5th. Sorry, take out the 5th, not the 3rd, and it affects nothing. It affects nothing chords. So we can leave out the 5th and the 9th. Alright, so this is an 11th chord. You can make it a minor 11th chord. Now we can leave out the 5th and the 9th, and it still has its quality. So we have this. It still sounds beautiful, but this is fuller. So take out the 9th and the 5th. The quality of the chord still remains. Then we go to the 13th chord. The 13th chord, you can omit the 5th, the 9th, and the 11th. So let's say you have your minor 13th chord. You can leave out the 5th, the 9th, and the 11th. So you have this. Or you can bring your 13th this way, very close here. But there will be so much dissonance. So you move your 13th up an octave. So those are the basic rules for omitting our notes in our extended chords. Alright, so we look at the added tone chords, like I said. Now I said if a chord has no 7th, you don't call it an extended chord, you call it an added tone chord. For example, if you add a 2 to a chord, you have 1, 2, 3, and 5. We call this a C add 9 chord. If you add a perfect 4th instead of a 9th to it, that's 1, 3, 4, 5. This is an add 4 chord. So this is C major add 4. It's the same thing as your F major 9 chord, by the way, because the F major 9 chord is this. So what makes a 5, this is a 5-note chord, while this is a 4-note chord. What are the notes they share? If you take note of what is happening here, so your F major 9 should be this, is it not? But we can see it reproduced here, and it's the same thing. That means we've omitted one note and we omitted the what? The 3rd. Adding the 3rd still makes it F major 9, but you can still name this chord your C major add 4. Then you have your by the way, let me just spell this out, that your add 9 and your add 2 are quite different. Your add 2, all 3 notes fall in the same octave. This is actually add 2, not add 9. Following what is on the screen, we can misdirect you. The add 9 is actually adding the 9th chord, the 9th note, an octave higher, not within the same octave. So this is add 2, while this is add 9. So please bear that in mind. So the same goes for add 4 and add 11. Add 4 would be like this, while add 11 would be like this. Alright, so we move on quickly to the altered chord. Now we've been looking at extension and added tones, so we're looking at altered chords. Now when you take your 9th, your 11th, and your 13th, and you flatten that note, maybe you take it a semitone lower or a semitone higher, we said you've altered that note, and automatically you've altered the extended chord. So we're going to start with our the alteration of the ninth note. So we start altering the ninth chords first. Alright, so we can either flatten the ninth or make it sharp. So we'll look at our major chord alterations in terms of ninth chords. So we'll look at the sharpened and the flattened. Alright, so let's look at the flattened ninth chord. So we'll look at C major 7 flat 9. Our 9 chord is our D in the key of C. As the C major 9 chord, let's sharpen the ninth instead of flattening it. I think this is a better sounding chord than the flat 9. Compare. So from your C major 9, flattened, C major 9 again, sharpen. So this is C major 9 with our sharp C major 7th with our sharp 9, C major 7 flat 9, C major 7th add 9. Alright, so we move on to our flattened 11th and sharpened 11th. For our flattened 11th, all we are going to have is this. Now this is our 11th chord, C major 11. Flatten it, we have this. We take the 11, flatten it a step lower. Then if it is a sharpened version, we add a semitone and it becomes this. So we have C, E, G, B, D and F sharp. So when you flatten it, you're actually having your C major 9 chord again, because that flattened form, that flattened note happens to be your third. It happens to be your third. Now we'll look at the flattened 13th and the added the sharpened 13. Now when it comes to the 13th chord, we look at the sharpened version and the flattened version this way. We just flatten or sharpened the 13th note. Alright, when you flatten it, this is the flattened 13, and when you sharpen it, this is the sharpened 13. So that will be your major 11 sharp 13, major 11 flat 13. So your altered chords are named based on the previous extension before it. So if it is a ninth chord, if it is a ninth extension, or sorry, ninth alteration, you call it C major or minor 7 or C dominant 7 flat or sharp. Then if it is an 11th chord, it becomes C major or minor 9 sharp or flattened, just that way. That is how you go about it. Then for the 13th, C major or minor 11th sharpened or flattened 13th. So those are basically your ways of altering it, and the same rules apply for your alteration of the minor and the major chords, even the dominant chords. So we'll just look at the use of the flat 5 and the sharp 5 chord. Now the flat 5 and the sharp 5 chords are usually employed very well in jazz. So now this is C major 7. This is our 5th note. We can flatten it. This becomes your C major 7 flat 5, because remember your 5th note does not determine what the chord actually is. It doesn't determine the quality of the chord. Then you can call this C major 7 add 5. So you see this. Basically you can employ it depending on what you want this chord to resolve to. Alright, so we have the sharp 9, the flat 9, we have sharpened 11th, the flattened 13, and those are the ones we use most of the time. Now let's just look at this. Now I'll stop by just mentioning this. What an altered chord is to a classical keyboardist or a pianist is different from what a jazz pianist refers to as classical an altered chord. An altered chord to a classical pianist is actually a chord that contains a note that is not in the scale. For example, your C dominant 7th chord, your C major actually is an altered chord to him because it contains a note that is not traditionally found in the C major scale. But to him too, your C major 11th chord is not an altered chord. See this. It's not an extended chord, rather it's not an altered chord. Now let's look at this. To your let's look at this. F sorry, let's go back. We see this altered chord to a classical pianist. Now let's look at this chord, F major 7 flat 11. This is F major 7, is it not? Now what is our flattened 11? This is our 4th. If we flatten the 11th, we have F A C E, then our sharpened 11 rather. Beautiful chord. This is actually an extended chord to a jazz pianist because in the key of F, B is not part of the F major scale. But to a jazz pianist, a classical pianist, in the key of C, if you play this chord in place of your F major chord, it is actually not an altered chord. Why? Because every note in this chord falls into the C major scale. For example, you play your C major, then takes you here. To a jazz pianist, this is an altered chord because it contains the flattened 11th in the scale of the F major scale. But your classical pianist, kings of the tonal center of the musical piece, the key signature is C, so this is still part of the key of C, dB. But your jazz pianist considers it as a flattened 11th. Alright, so I believe we've been able to gather some things. In the next video, I will now show you how to apply these altered chords when you're actually making music. Thanks for watching. God bless you.